So welcome to the Ames Public Library. I think we're all really excited to hear about Roosevelt School to Roosevelt Condos, a program brought to you through a partnership with the Ames Public Library and Ames History Museum. I'm Susan Gent, Community Engagement Specialist at the Ames Public and the Iowa State University Libraries. The Ames Public Library's mission is to connect you to the world of ideas, and we do this through diverse and inclusive resources and programs. And we invite you to join us for future programs, and you can learn about what's going on in the library through page 1 and get that as an email if you don't already do that. And we do have a few collection connections tonight on the table outside the door. Not sure what that is. And so all of those are available to check out. So you can just take them to the front if you're interested. The room is equipped with an induction loop for the benefit of hearing aid users. So if you would like to, turn your hearing aid to T to access that. And then for those of you joining us online, we'll have you submit your questions via the chat function, and someone from the Ames History Museum, Savannah, will read those and ask the tonight's speakers. And tonight's session is also being recorded, and it will be at the Ames History Museum's site, YouTube, wherever that is. So I'm going to let Alex from the Ames History Museum introduce tonight's presenters, and thanks for being here.
Wow, thank you so much. What a great crowd we've got in here tonight. Thank you. I'll start off by reminding everyone to turn off their cell phones, beepers, telegraphs, whatever you got in your pocket. We'll get those silenced so we won't interrupt the program. I'm Alex Pfeiffer, the exhibits manager at the Ames History Museum, and I want to welcome you all to our lecture series program and hello to everyone watching online. We're happy to have this great partnership with the Ames Public Library and be able to provide lectures in this hybrid format. And be sure to pick up one of these cards for the remaining dates on there. We've got one more lecture in our annual lecture series, so be sure to come back for that one next month. The Ames History Museum is a small nonprofit organization doing a big job with limited resources. We want to recognize and sincerely thank all those in attendance who are currently members of the museum. This faithful annual support provides essential funding for our day-to-day services in the community and our ability to preserve archives and artifacts for present and future generations. If you're not a member and like to become one, you can pick up one of our membership forms, and both of these are located on the table between the doors there. Our museum is currently closed for an expansion. If you didn't notice our big construction fence across the street there and everything that's going on, but museum staff and volunteers are still hard at work doing research requests, exhibits, programs, and preservation of Ames history. We look forward to welcoming you to our expanded museum later this year. And in the meantime, check our website, ameshistory.org, for more information about the expansion project and other upcoming events. Now, I'd like to introduce one of our speakers tonight for the evening. Sharon Wirth has demonstrated remarkable commitment over many years to local history in the Ames History Museum and to the community throughout a number of leadership roles. In addition to owning and restoring a historic home in downtown Ames, she was devoted to preserving and interpreting the Hoggett One-Room Schoolhouse Museum, and most recently spearheading the Making History Capital campaign to expand our museum. She has also contributed immeasurably to community awareness of local history by her leadership in the Old Town Historic District, City of Ames Historic Preservation Commission, and the Ames City Council, and also on the Downtown Plaques on the Historic Buildings Project. As you might expect, given her background, when she and her husband chose to downsize, she became an inaugural resident at the Roosevelt. And I'll bring up Sharon, who will introduce our other speaker for the evening. Thank you.
Good evening. It is wonderful to see so many people here. Is that about the right spot? Yes, okay. Thank you, Alex, for the introduction. I will just add to that introduction that my husband and I are parents of 2 Roosevelt alumni also. So our children attended Roosevelt from their K through 6 years. So a little extra connection there that we happen to have. I've been working with Luke Jensen on this presentation. I'd like to introduce him now. Luke, come on up here. Luke Jensen is the managing director of RES Development in Ames. RES is well known for renovating older structures and for building new ones that respond to community needs. Their unique work on the Crawford and the Roosevelt have created a model for adaptive reuse of older historic structures. Luke has learned from and then succeeded his father, Dean Jensen, who renovated the former Milford School for his private residence. Luke will talk later about and answer questions based on his personal experience of working with these important projects. So just want you to know who he is. Okay, so there are 4 parts to today's presentation. The first is some Roosevelt history. Next, we'll show a video about Roosevelt. It's about 35 minutes. Then Luke will talk about his experiences, and then I will wrap up with some updates regarding the Roosevelt condos. There will be time for questions and comments at the end. All right. This is an early photo of kindergarten students at Roosevelt School. What a great looking group. From the time the Roosevelt School opened until its closure, Roosevelt School played an important part in the social, cultural, and educational part of this part of Ames. The school and its grounds anchored the development of this residential area, serving as a neighborhood park, playground, elementary school, and community center. In 1921, there were 4 elementary schools in Ames. Beardshire School was located at 9th and Carroll, way over here to the east. Central School was located at 5th and Clark. Lincoln School was at South 2nd and South Kellogg, and Welch School was on South Highland. When Ames's intense population growth began, the opening of Roosevelt School served to balance the overcrowded elementary school needs. At the time, many Ames residents considered the site inappropriate and too far out in the country. Sounds funny today, doesn't it? The cornerstone of this building was laid in 1923. This is an early photo of the building exterior. Roosevelt School is now the longest surviving school built for the Ames Community School District. Some of you might think, wait, what about Hoggett School? Definitely preceded Roosevelt, but it was not built for the Ames Community School District. It was a township school when it was built. And then later it became part of the Ames School District. When opening on January 28, 1924, the school had 329 students, including 2 classes each of kindergarten through 6th grade. The school was a beacon, attracting new residents, and new houses quickly filled empty lots in the neighborhood. Many working at the Iowa State College, as it was then called, enjoyed the easy access from the neighborhood to campus. This forged important social ties between the college and the greater Ames community as the Ames population grew. In fact, Professor T.R. Agg, longtime Dean of Engineering, was president of the school board at this time, and Kimball, Bolly, and Cowgill architectural firm designed the school. Kimball was the founding head of the Iowa State College Department of Agricultural Engineering and Rural Structures, which was later known as the Department of Architecture. The Kimball firm designed numerous buildings in the Ames community and on the campus. Roosevelt School provided Ames's school children with the city's first modern schoolhouse. In addition to being fireproof, it met modern schoolhouse criteria by providing students with ample sunlight and fresh air through those large windows you see, room to play with separate playrooms for boys and girls, separate indoor toilets for each gender, hallway drinking fountains, coat rooms inside each classroom, large slate blackboards, and picture rail moldings in each classroom for hanging artwork and other visuals. However well-designed the building was when built, eventually more space and upgrading was needed. This shows the program cover from an open house when the new addition, when opened in September of 1969. Some things to notice here. Friedrich and Sons were the general contractor. We know the Friedrich name with Friedrich Realty today. That is the same family. Square footage of the addition was 10,900 square feet. The cost was $2,175 or $19.28 per square foot. Architects were Rudy and Dekovic, and I know some of you in the room are familiar with those names. The addition provided a music room, a kitchen, a large activity room used as the gym and cafeteria space, a nurse's office, a principal's office, several workrooms, a teacher's lounge, and a conference room, and an instructional media room or library. I'm not sure how a school operated without those, but they did. For most of us listening tonight, we have only known Roosevelt with this addition. Oh, I forgot to ask about a pointer. But notice blank wall here, and some decorative tiles over here. We'll hear more about those later, so I just wanted to point them out now, okay? Here you see halls from the year the school closed, 2005. There was a long battle, sometimes very contentious, in the community about closing Roosevelt School. So how did the building get from this in 2005 to this? The video will show you the transition from condos, from the school into condos, and then after the video, Luke will elaborate further on the transformation.
A public school closes for good. Some call it a shuttered school. Some say decommissioned. By any name, the structure becomes an empty building no longer needed by the governing school district and a likely candidate for demolition. This is a story about a school that narrowly missed that fate. In 1924, Roosevelt Elementary School first opened its doors to welcome children of Ames, Iowa. Located on land that was at the time close to the city limits, it was constructed in an age when public buildings were designed to inspire. One architecture scholar, Tom Leslie, calls the style 20th century civic classicism. It was a style very typical for the era and was used to convey a sense of monumentality and permanence. In addition to the exterior mass of the building, Roosevelt's architect, Alan Kimball, included details such as special brick patterns, large windows, tall ceilings, and ornate finishes. Former Roosevelt principal, Dallas Rust.
I am an Ames girl, born and raised in Ames. Therefore, I knew a lot of people, my classmates that had gone to Roosevelt. So I had been to the school, I had seen the school, I had been to the neighborhood, and I formed a very good opinion about that. I think more a sense of vastness when I was a little child. It's just that all of the hallways were huge. They were so wide, grand and big and massive and strong. Very, very encompassing in a safety sense.
As an adult and school administrator, Dallas Rust came back to the building in her professional life. While the massiveness of the building that inspired awe was still present, over the decades, parents, students, and faculty began to see Roosevelt School in another way.
It was so interesting that if you're an administrator going into lots of different buildings, you get a feel for the building within the first 5 minutes. And we call them warm buildings or cold buildings. And Roosevelt was always a warm building. I would go in, I would always feel comfortable even before I was the administrator there.
It was the activities of the children and the relationships developed from those activities that helped create the warm, inviting spirit of the school. From its earliest days, Roosevelt School had a maypole party to celebrate spring. And in a time when Christian religious symbols were still present in schools, there were Christmas programs and Easter egg trees. Through the decades, Roosevelt was the location for after-school activities such as Boy Scouts and Girl Scouts. There were also campfire groups that were part of the social experiences for the children. During the summer, organized playground sessions gave the neighborhood residents another chance to identify with the school. And on a summer afternoon, there was a neighborhood parade near the streets of 10th and Curtis that helped celebrate Roosevelt School. For many decades, those activities played out in a continuous stream of neighborhood 5-year-olds entering the school and emerging after 6th grade, ready for the next step in their education. And while Roosevelt alumni distinguished themselves in many ways, at least one became quite famous: National Basketball Association star Harrison Barnes. His success reminded neighbors that great things can happen from a small and cohesive community school. But Ames was changing. The population was moving to the periphery of the town, and the city center schools were closing. Before Roosevelt's future was in doubt, elementary schools along the town's main corridor had been closed, and one in another area of town was no longer used for classes, but it had been turned into an administration building. In addition to the population shifts, declining enrollment and funding formulas were playing havoc with the school district's budget. By the year 2005, the problems could not be ignored, and the school district felt another school closure was in order. Tim Taylor, superintendent of the Ames School District, was not head of the district when financial problems became acute, but he was a member in administration at the time and remembers the dynamics of the situation about Roosevelt.
That building was actually closed in 2005. And as you mentioned, it was really at that time, as I recall, and all the work that went into that, it was really a financial situation. You reach a point where you have to start looking for ways every year, and I can tell you in the 24 years that I've been here, there's only been 1 year that we have not had to make some kind of budget cuts in order to balance our budget. That was the real crux of the problem in 2005. The enrollment had declined to the point where it became very evident that we needed to look at ways that we could trim our budget to make sure that things would balance. I believe the superintendent there was W. Ray Richardson, and he was looking at nearly $1.8 million in budget cuts, and where we were going to find that was going to be a problem. Roosevelt was identified primarily because of its age, and not so much the location, even though it was located in the center of town. Our population had kind of, by our own development since 1985, had kind of gone to the perimeter. Financially, closing a building generally saves the district anywhere from $250,000 to $400,000 a year. So it was just not financially feasible, so opening up another attendance center within the district.
And just before I retired, we had bought up land. We had put on a new roof. We had a new boiler. We had paved the parking lot. We had 2 houses Actually, we had all 3 of the houses that were on the rest of the block committed that if they sold, they would sell them to the school district. So I was in high hopes that Roosevelt would be there forever. And so when the news came, I was devastated, both personally and professionally.
Ames, Iowa was not alone in the school closing dilemma. The Pew Charitable Trusts sponsored a national study of shuttered schools looking at what happened to empty education buildings in 12 large cities across the United States. From 2005 to 2012, the study examined properties that had been decommissioned, some of them left crumbling for more than a decade. And at one point, Roosevelt School also was in danger of being a blight.
I know we did have some vagrants that moved in. We had some damage that was done to the building by people who would break windows or other ways to gain access. We know that we had some vagrants that were living in it, but the police would check that regularly and we would chase them out. So there was some damage and other destruction to the inside of the building from people who would get into the building and just do some nasty things. We did have one fairly serious fire that took place because a vagrant had moved in and for whatever reason began to start a fire, but we were very lucky that some of the neighbors caught that very early, and it was not one that created any structural damage to the inside of the building.
But the central question of what to do with the building remained. The Pew Charitable Trust report found that in 12 big cities there were more than 560 shuttered schools in the interval between the years of 2005 and 2012. The study revealed that less than half of the decommissioned buildings in the big cities found a reuse. Of the buildings that were saved, 40% became charter schools. Sue Kroll, a community sociologist and a parent whose children had walked to Roosevelt School, had her hopes high.
Well, all along, starting in 2005, we hoped to reopen it as a school. We tried a charter school approach. We had a beautiful application ready for charter school. But in Iowa, charter schools have to be approved by your school board, which makes it kind of strange, but that's the Iowa law. And so our parents, because it was a parents' initiative, I was a consultant as a community sociologist, and the parents presented it to the school board, and the school board, would consider it, read it, etc. Well, the superintendent announced to the high school faculty that he would have to drop a whole lot of programs, particularly sports, if this happened. Well, the parents just panicked because they didn't want to be known as the group who caused Ames to lose their sports and orchestra and band, etc. So they caved, and the committee voted, and the vote was to withdraw the charter school application.
Various groups and organizations were stakeholders in the Roosevelt outcome. So for roughly a 5 to 6 year period, proposals would surface for what to do with the building. Some wanted to just get rid of it. Others wanted the land leveled and affordable housing constructed. But along the way, a community advocacy group succeeded in having Roosevelt School put on the National Register of Historic Places, and they paid to have an architect evaluate the soundness of the structure. In other words, could it be reused? Adding momentum to the Save Roosevelt in some form was a group that was lobbying for the preservation of the playground as a city park.
Save the Building and Save the Park actually joined forces because in 2012, I think it was, the school board recommended that Roosevelt be demolished. And the irony there was it would cost more to demolish it than it would for them to sell the land. So they would be in a deficit by demolishing. And the Boone landfill said, if you ever take that building down, you're going to fill up our whole landfill with cement. So that was kind of a joke. And so 3 of us in particular, Sharon Wirth, myself, and Irv Kloss, started working with news articles in the paper, letters to the editor. They finally featured us each presenting a guest column. We went to every school board meeting and spoke at every forum about, you need to consider selling the building. Don't demolish the building.
And by 2012, demolition of the building was a real possibility. One of Sue Kroll's fellow advocates was former Ames City Council member and longtime advocate for historic preservation, Sharon Wirth. She describes the efforts to keep the school standing.
I did not become involved until probably 2011, when suddenly there was a new school board elected, and they wanted to dispose of quite a number of properties that they had that were empty and were not being used for their purposes anymore. At the time this was happening, I was serving on the Historic Preservation Commission for the City of Ames, and I was chairing the commission at that time. So we were talking about it there. People were coming to us as individual members of the community, talking to us. People were coming to our meetings, talking to us about this building. Just in general, there are such, and there continues to be such incredibly strong community ties to this building and this site. A fair amount of letter writing, a fair amount of attending a number of meetings, whether those were school board meetings, whether they were real estate committee meetings. For whatever reason, the timing was right, I think. We had the right people, and we had enough of the right people providing some leadership and some passion. And they came forward to act as a catalyst, and when they came together, it was just a force. Part of that force was definitely the developer, Dean Jensen, coming forward at the right time. That was very, very critical because, as you said, often people have great ideas for historic buildings, but if somebody doesn't come forward to put up the money, to put in the energy, to put in the sweat equity to make it happen, it doesn't happen. So all of those things came together at the right time for this building.
Roosevelt School caught developer Dean Jensen's eye because he had recently renovated a school building outside of the Ames city limits in Story County for his home and office. That building, the old Milford School, constructed in 1923, was a contemporary of the Roosevelt building. His familiarity with the time period and the favorable location of Roosevelt in the so-called urban center of Ames, with walkability to downtown, were factors as he approached the school board with a bid to buy. In addition, Jensen believed that a condominium project with the adjacent park would not only be attractive, but would be economically viable for development.
Quite early in the process, after the school board started talking about demolition, and others of us in the community started talking about preserving the building, he expressed an interest in the building. The other thing that is, I believe, is so pivotal about Dean is his approach and his philosophy about old buildings, but also about working with people.
There was a fair amount of research done prior to making an offer to the school district. Surprisingly low, so it was $25,000, and immediately when we bought it, there were several $100,000 worth of work that had to be done, such as asbestos remediation, the tuck pointing, and all of the work that needed to be done immediately to save that building, just to rescue it. So the amount of purchase price is not reflective of what its value was.
And so we were very excited when Jensen bought it. And, you know, we had seen the property that he developed for his home, which was also an old school. So he knew what he was doing. When we met with him, you could tell that he definitely was very concerned about the look. He was very concerned about the use. He was very, very concerned about the neighborhood and how he wanted to fit in with the neighborhood.
It took process. It took a number of meetings and time to make that happen, but it was a very big team effort, a community effort. We started at that level because the project is in their backyard, and so we wanted to start at the level of the Preserve Roosevelt.
Dean Jensen bought Roosevelt School and started multitasking. He was working with neighbors to keep the project true to the character of the area, talking with historic preservation experts, and in some cases yielding on things like balconies on the front of the building. At the same time, he was preparing the building for reshaping, so there could be new interior spaces for living. He also had to market the project to prospective buyers. He describes the process as writing several chapters of a book.
But essentially, on a project like this, the demolition, as we've talked about, is the first part, and you're anxiously awaiting affirmation in my case. Affirming that things are where you thought they were. One of the nice things that we had were the original blueprints. So the school district invited me up to their little office, and we're able to thumb through and find the original blueprints, which will be a part of the Roosevelt's permanent collection. And on that, then we were able to transfer that to CAD and be able to know exactly where structure was at. So as we unveiled the project, it affirmed what we thought. And so that was chapter number 1 is affirmation. You know, we mentioned the word rescue, so there's a big chapter in that you want to rescue more than you think, because you don't know how it might be inquired later. So we rescued a lot of truckloads of material did not go to the dump. They left the property for the sake of preserving them in a warehouse, and then we carefully brought them back, refinished, refurbished. So that's number 2. I think number 3, it has to do with editing, and editing always shows back up because you start, you make marks, and the project, the building, tells you what it wants to do or not do, things like width of hallways, transitions between floors. All those things are not necessarily driven by an architect on an AutoCAD, but they're driven by what the building will allow you to do practically. So there's this editing, kind of a dance with the project that you do. And then there's an educational part where the subcontractors that are selected have to understand that vision of preservation and marriage. And so a fair amount of time is spent in a classroom or a conference room going over concepts and ideas that are somewhat strange to certain people. They're strange as to why you can't just slam a pipe right where you want it and cover it up with sheetrock. That's not the way that project worked. So we had to carefully design those things, and there's an educational component within that. So that's another chapter. And then I think as the project started to take hold and take shape, there's a listening of the users, and so the buyers started to come about, and so their perspectives were integrated as well.
The original blueprints showed a sound building. Happily for Jensen and his crews, they discovered through the removal of some of the interior that Roosevelt was in fact a building with good bones.
We had a great building to start with. We set a plumb bob on 3rd floor, drilled a hole through 2nd down into 1st.
But with any old building, there are surprises and difficulties.
Those are nightmares because you're in the guts of the building, trying to make sure it's modernized and it's preservable for the next 50 to 100 years. And those things have to be done. They're not fun, but they're critical. And I think that those were the biggest challenges, is all the hidden things that you don't see on a typical tour. Well, when you convert, conversion often invites how do you do it? And things like plumbing, where it was set up to have boys' bathrooms, girl bathrooms, boy shower, girl shower. It wasn't set up for 20 living accommodations, so immediately the plumbing becomes a big topic. Well, it had the old system of boilers that originated with fuel oil and probably some coal kinds of rooms that originally fired that building up, had no air conditioning, no insulation. One of the preservation elements that's important is to reduce the amount of outside noise.
Saving interior elements of the building that were evocative of the 1920s was both satisfying and frustrating. Many things had already been removed or were damaged, and others needed approval to be used in a new way. For example, many Roosevelt graduates had reminisced about the grand open staircases.
It had been, I use the word buried, into drywall. We were able to get permission from the city to unveil those staircases and restore them. One staircase was reasonably in order, and so we used that as a template and worked with a local welder, a local cabinet maker who rebuilt the other staircases to match. And so we were fortunately able to know what an original piece looked like and then carried that through the building.
The conceptual stage of the project began just before the demolition and the saving of building elements. Jensen invited prospective buyers to a series of informational meetings at his home. For Roosevelt School, he had envisioned a mix of 1, 2, and 3 bedroom condos in a variety of shapes and in building orientations, with a total of 23 units. At his first informational meeting, 5 buyers stepped forward to commit to the project. As some of the first to make pledges to buy, they were able to customize their space. In fact, half of the project has customized condos, with the owners closely involved.
I began to see and think about how very interesting and unusual the spaces could be. And so at that point, we said, this is a good idea. No outdoor maintenance. It's in the heart of Ames. We have lived in the urban core of Ames for many, many years. And as we were moving through life, thinking about where will we be in the future, one of our issues was, geez, we really want to be in the urban core, but there isn't the kind of housing opportunity we might like. And so when this came along and we learned a little bit more about it, became comfortable working with Dean, we said, better just jump on the bandwagon. So we did. From the beginning, Dean's philosophy, and Dean and his team, was, you can shape your space. You can be as involved as you want to in the decision making. So, we're going, oh, okay. And then, suddenly they started asking us questions. Do you want this? Do you want this? What about this? What about that? And we're going, oh, wow. So we decided we would either have to just let them decide or we would decide. So we jumped in very early then and came over a number of times and looked around the building and said, first off, the decision was, where do you want to be in the building? And then the much more difficult decision of how much space do you want in the building? So it was certainly a wonderful process. And so from the very beginning, the windows were just so critical, and not only to my husband and I as potential homeowners, but to anybody who was interested in preserving the building. The windows just were such key elements. Certainly the way they dealt with woodwork in terms of doing the research, finding out what that original woodwork looked like. The profiles of the trim are what was here originally. The profile of the doors are here what was originally. The newel posts have very similar details to the original newel posts just outside our doors.
Each condo has what is called a feature wall. In the Wirth's condo, it is the combination of fireplace and bookcases. The bookcases are not from Roosevelt, but they are from the same time period, and the grid pattern of the bookcase doors matches the grid pattern in the Roosevelt windows and the Roosevelt doors. On the Wirth's feature wall, in addition to their own materials, there are actual pieces saved from the original Roosevelt building.
If you look at the very top of the trim on the feature wall here, that is actually an original chalkboard tray from the school. And the dark wood that you see framing the upper panel there is all original Roosevelt woodwork also. We love living here. It is just a wonderful space. It's well designed, it's well constructed. It's in a beautiful neighborhood. It's in the core of downtown. It's quiet. We have wonderful people living in the building. You know, we could not ask for better neighbors. It's just all good.
There were many stakeholders in the process, including the school district, the neighborhood, historic preservationists, and of course, Dean Jensen.
So what drives a project like that is fulfillment of vision, meeting needs, understanding what that client's really wanting, and putting money into a little bit of a back seat to not cause that to be the driving factor. We were probably about 20% off of our projections in the projects.
And while meeting needs was the driving factor, any private development must make money. Dean Jensen declined to describe the profitability of the project, but he did say it was definitely worth the time and effort. The cost of construction was around $125 to $150 per square foot, and the condos sold, depending on the size and finish elements, for roughly $150,000 to $330,000. During the time that Roosevelt was being reimagined and rebuilt for a new use, other Ames School District properties met less favorable outcomes. The old Ames Middle School not only was unsuitable for reuse, but there were acrimonious battles about what to do with the land. Roosevelt was a bright spot at a time when the district needed one.
I think the real critical elements were a developer stepped forward. The building could be remodeled and repurposed into something else, which in this case is loft apartments, which is very sorely needed, I think. The neighborhood saw that their playground was going to stay there. The city has taken that over as part of their city park organization, so that's about as happy an ending as you can possibly get.
And yet, some people were wistful about the vanishing classrooms in the city center.
The neighborhood still talks about it. The neighborhood, when we see the children get on the bus to go to Meeker, they still go, oh, if they could just, you know, they could have walked to Roosevelt so easily. Well, definitely, because the building looks beautiful. The park is wonderful. So even though we don't have a school, we have something very, very nice. And I think several people in the neighborhood are very proud that it looks so nice and the park is there for the kids. So I think it was the best that we could do.
You know, I guess as a longtime neighborhood advocate and preservation advocate, it is so rewarding to be involved in a project and to see a positive thing happen in the end. And I just cannot imagine any kind of a project that could have a better result than this one did.
Sharon and her husband Don Wirth are not the only residents extremely happy with the reconfigured Roosevelt. Their upstairs neighbors, Jim and Julie Popkin, now live in a condominium that includes a loft, space that was rediscovered in the demolition process and put to a new, creative use. While many people are happy with the reimagined Roosevelt building, some are aware that the refurbished structure is not the typical result for decommissioned buildings. Most buildings experienced a less happy ending. So what made a difference for Roosevelt?
How we've ended here on the project with great relationships and a great perspective on the struggle that this kind of project brings to many urban communities around the country, and so it's been a very great process.
Starting and sustaining a process can be daunting. On a national level, the Pew Charitable Trust's report states, no matter how well a district goes about it, the process of repurposing surplus property remains inherently difficult, politically, financially, logistically, and emotionally. Both on a local and a national level, the repurposing of Roosevelt Elementary School defied the odds.
It's fabulous. It's absolutely wonderful. Schools can be changed into a wonderful thing for communities.
Well, that is a wonderful story, and I think very accurately depicts the background on Roosevelt, and I think the outcome. So, watching that video, I feel like I look like my dad, and I think that's a good thing. So, unfortunately, my father was unable to join us tonight, and I just wanted to share a few remarks and then go through some observations as at the time, a young real estate developer. So I'm very thankful to have played a role at such a young age in the Roosevelt redevelopment. As you know, tonight and this year, we're celebrating 100 years of the Roosevelt School. We've talked about the building was originally designed and built in the early 1920s, completed in 1924. Interesting fact, it was referred to as the Second Ward School. So on those blueprints, it says in the letter block, architect's letter block, Second Ward School. The building was built with the highest quality materials and the finest craftsmanship. As we worked through the extraction of different aspects during the demo phase, we often marveled at the thoughtfulness and cleverness of those who built the building 90 years earlier. They don't build it like this anymore is a common phrase. The building faithfully served educational and social needs of the growing Ames community for decades, but eventually, and as the report in the story says, it's very common, ran out of steam to keep up with the changing learning environments and modern needs. Scope and scale that was required of the improvements proved to be too much, and the school was closed down. Well, the closure created both uncertainty, but also opportunity. The property sat vacant for nearly 7 years, and my father, Dean Jensen, had a great vision to bring the Roosevelt School back to life. We called it Roosevelt Reimagined. That was the phrase that we used as a family, and then we used it in marketing material and conversations with the community. My father saw what few could, a historically significant structure in a vibrant urban core neighborhood ready for redevelopment. Once his mind was made, it was off to the races, and inside of 2 short or long years, depends on how you want to look at that, time, new friends and families relocated to the modernized building are the condos. I'm going to go to a slide. So I represent RES Development. We are a local real estate company and have been really fortunate to be a part of some significant historical redevelopment, adaptive reuse projects. The video outlined certainly Milford School, which is where my father and mother live. The Roosevelt School, which was the first in-town redevelopment. And then from that, the success of the Roosevelt led to Crawford School redevelopment, which is a South Campus public school that was a district office for Ames Community School District. We've also done some things in Campus Town with the suites on Lincoln Way, in Campus Flats, and a number of other miscellaneous development projects. So we are excited and pleased to be a part of the community here in Ames and be able to touch a lot of different aspects of the real estate cycle. So this was the objective. We laid this out very early on, adaptively repurpose the vacant school into high quality housing while respecting compatibility with the neighborhood and historical significance of the structure. So that was a goal that we had at the very, very beginning of the project. And I think the video outlined the approach that we took very well of really being involved in the stakeholders' interests and listening. And as my dad said in the presentation, just listening and editing and reacting and evolving with these ideas. And I think a theme that I recall going through this process was stewardship. It was something that for a brief period of time, it was our building, but we were able to share that with the community and really return it back to the community's building. So this is kind of an interesting, my dad's background is in art education. So for 20 years prior to being involved in real estate, he taught art education at the college level. And as a kid, we moved around to different communities in Nebraska and Kansas, and he typically worked at small liberal arts colleges or community colleges in art. And he's always had a deep passion for artistic and creative efforts. As he got into real estate and into business, I think he was always interested in finding something that would maybe fulfill that interest in creativity, but also have a real estate component. And so he started with his home, the Milford Township School, which is just northeast of Ames. That property is actually going to be sold or closed on later this summer, and they'll be moving into town. But that was the first redevelopment. And so he had a good practice run with that building, and then the Roosevelt, and then the Crawford School. And so in a lot of ways, these schools are like art projects to him. He's able to take something that was neglected or forgotten and breathe new life into it. It's really an outlet for these creative juices to manifest themselves and come together to be a purposeful space. Okay, so I think we'll probably have time for questions at the end, but I know that this is a interesting thing to walk us through tonight is how did we do it? And I've outlined, and I don't think this outline does justice of that process, but it started with a conceptual idea, a visualization. Hey, what could this property become? And then it went into market analysis and evaluation, structural evaluation. Then there was conversations with stakeholders. Started with the Ames Historic Preservation Commission, other preservationists in the community. And I think as Sharon mentioned in the video, there was just this right timing for a lot of these different players to come together and look for a positive outcome. There was a lot of outreach with the citizens of Roosevelt Park. In that concept, I've got in the back a number of iterations and of what the site could be. And there was lots of feedback of, hey, let's reorient this garage so it feeds this way, or can we make the park a little bit bigger? So lots of iterations to create a concept. Certainly financial analysis and pro forma and modeling. And then was the actual part of acquiring the property from the school district, going through the public approvals, and would like to give credit to the city of Ames. They did a great job of helping us through that process. Bob Kindred was heavily involved at that time and did a remarkable job of helping us navigate these waters. There hadn't been a school property transition to private ownership and into a residential, and I don't think it had been a long time. The notes were pretty blurry from when it has been done previously. And then we jumped into the construction, pre-sales, and construction completion. So again, that's just a brief outline of the different steps that took place over a 2.5-year period. Here's our project timeline. So it was roughly 3 to 6 months of planning. There was 12 to 15 months of construction. And then the sales period was 6 to 12 months. So we were very, very fortunate to have early buyers join the vision. And so when we opened the first building, I think we had 3 or 4 units that we needed to sell after the first residents moved in. I think Sharon might have been the first resident to move in December of 2014. So forgive me, there's a typo. I don't know what 215 is, but all right. Well, these are some interesting pictures. One thing that came up in the video that was true is certainly preservation of the existing products. The quality and of the building was better than what we could go buy at the lumber yard or at another place to source. So we did painstakingly, but well worth it, reclaimed almost all of the bricks. So if you guys recall the gymnasium addition, there's new window openings there. We cut those. Sharon asked me to lay out the list. I need like 5 pages to talk about the process, but cut openings with the concrete saw. So very messy, hard job up in the air. And that created the outline of the openings. And then there would be some kind of like punch to break open. And then we would just take down by hand chunks of brick to extract those bricks. Then there was chiseling the existing mortar and grout to get back to just a core brick. So these bricks measure roughly 8-inch by 2.5 or 3 inches, depending on the brick. And then we would clean the bricks with wire brush and acid wash. And then they were stacked and palleted. We moved them off site and then brought them back or donated them or used them in different areas throughout the building. The park also has some of these bricks. So We worked on, and that was just one example of products. A lot of the wood floors and wood trim and case and slate chalkboards, all of those went through a similar process of preservation. There's a good view of what we found as extraction and opening up these areas. And then this is just kind of a brief list of some of the reclaimed elements, and brought those back in to mimic the original construction of the building. We'll talk about this in a little bit, but these are some of the art inlays that were reclaimed from a 1960s class. And there's an exterior completion of the building. I just love this angle. I think what I love about it is I know it's from the park, and I just think about, I have 3 children and we've spent time at that park, just looking back at that and seeing life in the school building. And it's not dangerous. It's not filled with something that shouldn't be there, but there's certainty, and there's families and people living there, enjoying their lives. Okay, I'm gonna spend just a little bit of time. This is a fun slide, just to talk about the results of the project. Certainly positive community outcome. There's a lot of stakeholders involved, and I think it's very, very rare to come to the end of a process and generally be friends with the people that you did business with, that you worked with. And so I think that's a neat testimony to the city of Ames, a neat testimony to the Old Town District and the Friends of Roosevelt Park, the owners that are at the building. Very unique situation and outcome. The building had a lot of uncertainty. There was rumors, there was crime, there was damage. And by doing this project, it created neighborhood certainty. I also practice real estate and sell property. This area, Old Town, prior to this project, had a little bit of an unknown. Like I would like to live there maybe, but I don't know what's going to go on with that school. Now it's well known, it's well respected, it's a great neighborhood. It's close to a lot of the services of downtown, and it's a very, very desirable neighborhood. And I think this project contributed mightily to that. Another cool thing is a lot of times we hear chatter from people that they want something or they think we should do something from a developer standpoint. It was awesome to see preservationists, historians step forward and become buyers. And I think that's a unique thing that we experienced there, was people that put their money where their mouth was and stepped forward as buyers and contributors to the cause. Certainly diversifies product types. So at the time, I don't believe there had been much in the way of adaptive reuse condominiums for sale. I recall meeting with different people at various times that would come from larger markets, larger university towns, and they'd say, "Yeah, I live in a condo in Ann Arbor. Where's the condos in Ames, Iowa?" And it was a pretty short conversation. There wasn't a lot to choose from, and so by creating this and having it fill up with great residents, it created opportunity at Crawford School and some other places that became, this is a viable product of housing. I think there's 10 first generation owners. I may be incorrect, but there's 10 first owners at the building still there. And when they moved over, many of them were local, their homes became available for the next owners to come in. And that opens up housing stock, which is something that was sorely needed in 2013, 14, and still is probably even more today, is opening up housing stock that can bring people to our community. And by having this in the neighborhood, we've seen that effect of having more people come and have a place to move. As Sharon said, she loved the area, she was familiar with it, and wanted to have something that she could move to. I did this rough calculation earlier today. So as you guys probably know, as a school, there was never any property tax or assessment for the property. Looking at just rough numbers, 20 units, a little over 300,000 is today's average assessed value there. That's $6.2 million of valuation, and that translates to just under $100,000 of property tax collection for the city of Ames from a place that was zero for close to 90 years. So I think that's a cool economic benefit to this project as well. Sustainability efforts, we talked a lot about the reclaimed materials, reduced construction demo debris. One really cool feature about Roosevelt that we weren't able to do at some of the other projects is the geothermal heating and cooling. So it's a very, very efficient way to heat a big building like the Roosevelt. We talk about economic impact. So there was roughly 60 construction workers on site for about a year. And that was a massive project at the time. And then we're 10 years from when we started the project. We're 100 years from when Roosevelt was opened. And there's still excitement. This room is packed with people interested in learning about the Roosevelt and Roosevelt School. And again, that's been an awesome thing to be a part of, and really thankful that I can be here tonight and share a little bit of perspective on my experiences there. I will turn it over to Sharon.
Thanks, Luke. Very informative. My husband and I moved to the Roosevelt in December of 2014 when the building was open to residents. That was nearly 10 years ago, as Luke was mentioning. Sometimes we ask ourselves, how can that be? It really does not seem possible. So I wanted to talk a little bit about what's happening with the Roosevelt school site now. From the beginning, the outdoor space on the Roosevelt grounds has been important to the neighborhood, serving as a playground, a neighborhood park, and community gathering space. You heard about creation of the Roosevelt Park on the video. One of the activities that takes place at the park is the Summer Sunday concerts. These are organized by a volunteer group. The concert series celebrated their 20th anniversary last year, so that's pretty amazing. The concerts happen at 7 p.m. each Sunday, June through August. The concerts are well attended by the neighbors and by others from the Ames community. There are schedules which look like this over on the table at the side here if you want to know what's going on this summer for the concerts. The park is a busy place. It's a popular place for neighborhood children, whether for games, birthday parties, or other activities. Neighborhood volunteers have stepped up to participate in the Parks and Recs Adopt a Bed program, which provides and cares for flowers in the Ames parks. Okay, let me see if I can do this here. Here we go. All right, notice the structure right here in the upper left program, the left corner there, the long narrow structure in this picture. This is known as the potluck table. It was part of the Roosevelt School playground. So it was repurposed, reused in the Roosevelt Park, and it now serves a variety of purposes. So just another example of some reuse. Today, the Roosevelt condos are governed by a board of directors comprised of resident owners. The group is responsible for the operation of the condo building and grounds, covering everything from finances to maintenance to planning for the future. There is a property manager to assist the board with these tasks. I'd like you to notice the quilt hanging on the wall in our conference room. This was part of the Artist in Residence program for the schools. With support from the Roosevelt PTA, a different artist was brought into the school for a period of time once a year to work with the children, providing enhanced hands-on learning from the artists. One year, this was a quilt artist, and several quilts were created with the help of the students. This one was hanging in the media center when the school closed. A second one has also been donated back to the building. So we're really excited to have those returned to us. We've been told that there were at least 3 quilts. So if anybody listening has any information about the quilting activity or additional quilts, we would certainly love to hear from you. A small area of pollinator plants was added to the grounds in 2016. This area, located on the east side between the building and the park, was expanded with an additional 400 plants in 2023. This is maintained by resident volunteers. We've been pleased with our efforts to attract and provide a safe space for the pollinators while enjoying the beautiful blooms of these native plants. Residents feel that building community is important, both internally and externally. Internally, you see on the left a progressive holiday party, which is held annually, where several residents, volunteers host, and the group moves together from unit to unit, enjoying conversation, food, and games. On the right, you see Trick or Treat Night. Roosevelt residents, some in costume, will greet neighborhood children and hand out treats. There is also a party for residents and the collecting of donations for a local food pantry at the same time. Earlier, you saw pictures of the brick animals on the walls of the building. When the 1968-69 addition was being planned, the architect wanted to include Roosevelt students in the process. Working with the art teacher, Glenn Connor, they asked the then 6th grade students, so this was for the class of 1967 and 68 school year, to create tiles that would later be used on the walls of the building addition. You saw these indicated on the wall space of the illustration in the slides earlier. Today, some of these are on the outside of the building. Some are found in internal halls, and some are inside individual condominium units. This feature was planned into the design of the addition. Bids for the addition were not approved by the school board until August 27th of 1968. So this means that these tiles were created before the project bid was actually approved. So a lot of foresight there went into that process. A photo display of the brick animals has been created inside the building. Current residents see the brick animals as a treasured part of Roosevelt's history, and we're certainly very pleased that they were retained in the reuse project. The students involved with these animals became the Ames High Class of 1974. As part of celebrating Roosevelt's 100th anniversary, we have tried to identify artists who created the brick animals. This was some 66 years ago that this artwork was done. So we've located 6th grade photos. This is Mrs. Hollenbach and her students, 6th grade students at the time. This is Mr. Toston and his class at the time. Fun to see the fashions here, isn't it? Anybody here in the audience who's in these pictures? Not in that picture, but then we have one. I'm going to talk about her in a minute. Here are some of the names of the artists who have been identified so far and the artwork that they did, assisted by earlier efforts of Ed Hendrickson Jr. and recently by Robin Haugland Fletcher. 10 of the 15 artists have been identified. I need to call out Robin. Raise your hand up high. She's over there. And acknowledge how amazing her work has been on this. She has also located and shared the class photos. Thank you, Robin. If anybody listening has more information about the artists, especially those unidentified artworks, we would certainly love to hear from you. The artworks where the artists so far as unidentified are a bumblebee, a butterfly, a snake, and then fish 1 and fish 2. As part of celebrating 100 years, there are plans being made to host a reception and a tour this summer for the artists and others from the Ames High class of 1974 when they are in town for their 50th class reunion. Roosevelt residents are also collaborating with the concert planning group for some celebration activities at the June 23rd concert. And there have been discussions about hosting an open house for former Roosevelt faculty and staff. Throughout the 100-year celebration process, I've had the opportunity to communicate with various Roosevelt alumni and staff, learning new information about the school and its activities. These contacts have reinforced my feeling that Roosevelt School was and is a special place. A warm thank you to all of those who contributed to this growing knowledge and also to this presentation. I did start to list names, but there were just too many, but you know who you are. Roosevelt residents are always eager to learn more about the years when our building served as a school. If you have memories or information to share, please reach out. And I have some cards here with contact information. If you need one of those, just let me know. We want to just take a few minutes and recognize those who are present with Roosevelt ties. So first off, I know we have a contingent of Roosevelt residents. Can you all just raise your hand? These are the people that make Roosevelt such a good place to be. How about alumni and parents of alumni? Raise your hand. Lots of you. Terrific. Glad to see it. How about faculty and staff? I know we have some of those. Wonderful. Wonderful. Anybody with other connections to the school? Now, everybody who raised your hand, put it up at the same time. It's a pretty big group of people, and I know there are people online who would fit into these categories also. So thank you for listening tonight. We do want to have time for questions and comments for both myself and Luke, so we will open it up to that now. Luke, if you would come back up here, because I know some of the questions are going to be for you.
And I've got the microphone here that will raise their hand, and I'll bring that over so that people online can hear us. All right.
Luke, you had mentioned a loft that was found in one of the apartments when you did the demolition. Can you tell us what was up there originally?
Okay, so this is, go back here. Okay, so we were not certain what the second floor, the upper floor's total floor to ceiling height was. And I think it came out to be about 17 or 18 feet, which was enough to put a loft across and use the full dimension of that floor to ceiling. And I think it was just in the original 1923, the 68, it drops down just a little bit. You can see that step down right there.
That one back here.
So I was curious about your personal involvement. Were you a teenager, a young adult, or what?
I love that.
Only 5 years old.
I love that question. I was 28 years old when this started. So I was relatively a young pup. So I did everything from on the demolition crew to meeting with buyers and bankers. And so I was really privileged to have a full access to the entire process. So my role was very different every day.
I think Alex has a question back there.
Yeah, you mentioned that Roosevelt was on the historical register that way, and I was wondering how complicating it made to do your work refurbishing this place to meet the guidelines that go along with maintaining that status on the historical register. It wasn't listed on this, one of the things that you had to deal with and that, but it seems like historical buildings have to still be preserving the place. And how did the improvements that you made fit into still keeping it on the historical register?
Yeah, it's a really great question. So we're really fortunate to have been surrounded by people that were familiar with the process. If I recall, most of the requirements related to exterior of the building, and there were some different exceptions that could be granted, like those balconies. So there were some different areas where the trade-off was, or they provided exceptions on different architectural elements. The primary facade, this picture that you see here, was very important to maintain the architectural accuracy of that. And so we were surrounded by a really great team. Our architecture firm was J Corp. They were out of Huxley at the time and helped navigate a lot of the design considerations with it.
If I could just add a little bit about preservation. Preservation really is not about leaving everything exactly as it was originally. Certainly, as Luke mentioned, on the front facade, the main facade of the building, you certainly want to maintain those very critical architectural components. But a lot of preservation is about encouraging reuse and maintaining the building for future use. So with that comes, of course, a lot of changes, and many of those will be on the interior. But some are on the exterior. You know, balconies were added. We talked a little bit about cutting windows into what was the blank wall that was the gym. So really a combination of restoration and maintaining those very important historic architectural elements and making some compatible architectural changes at the same time.
I was interested that late in its life as an elementary school, the Roosevelt PTA built this huge playground maze, and that was very popular with at least 2 generations of kids.
Yes, it was wonderful. That playground was the first of its kind in Ames, and then afterwards several other schools did a similar thing. That was located where the parking garage is now. So our son, a Roosevelt alumni, likes to say, tear down paradise and put up a parking lot. He likes to remind us about that. So yeah, definitely trade-off. But I think the structure was probably about at the end of its useful life at this particular time anyway.
Yeah. Aside from the brick animals, were there any other examples of artwork found in the Roosevelt that were able to be preserved and or reused?
Those are really the only structural artwork. You know, we do have some student pieces that have come back to us, like the quilts and those kinds of things. But as far as I know, the animals were the only structural. Is that right? Yeah. Okay.
Prior to, like, the school district, like, literally left everything in the building. So we moved and gave away chairs and desks and other memorabilia from the school. We had a couple of open house or garage sales for people to come and take anything that they wanted to help us out.
Yeah, now that I said all that, I want to back up and make a correction. There was on one wall inside the school a Christian Peterson piece of artwork that was erected in about the mid-1950s in memory of a child who was killed crossing 13th Street on the way to school. early in the years after the school closed, that particular piece of artwork was removed so that there would not be vandalism to it. And it is now in the Christian Peterson collection in the museum over on campus. The moving, yeah, that's Dallas, by the way. She was principal at the Roosevelt for many years. So you saw her on the video, and it's really fun to have her here too. But she's mentioning that the removal of the artwork from the school was done with the permission of the father of the family. Excellent, thank you.
One of the things, Luke, that you didn't talk about, my mother lives in 207, the pie making lady. Anyway, one of the things you didn't bring up was that your father also used other salvaged items from other places in this building.
Yeah, so great point. Some of the feature walls, we talked about that in the video, like there's different elements in each condo that were kind of these, what we described as feature walls. And a lot of times we'd bring in period sensitive cabinetry or different components that would kind of, as my dad would say, nod to that era. And so I recall several times going up to different salvage yards or other old schools. There was a school in northern Iowa in Stacyville that was going to be demoed, and we reclaimed a bunch of different products out of that. There's a facility out of Minneapolis, St. Paul area called Bauer Brothers, and they had all kinds of old fireplace surrounds, and we would reintroduce those into the building. And there's a number of buffets that were also included in the units.
I'm wondering, when it was vacated, were there stories start to be circulated like it was haunted or there was a witch there or something going on, especially when it was inhabited by vagrants?
Yeah. I don't know the answer to that. Could anybody enlighten us about stories of the haunting of Roosevelt? I guess not. Go ahead.
Hi, my name is Jeff Hart, and I'm on a committee for the Roosevelt Parks concerts, the Friends of Roosevelt Park, and I'm just sitting back here watching all this tonight, and we were there. We started the concerts in like 2002, and the school closed in 2005. We had these concerts on the asphalt playground in front of that large gym wall that you saw was the addition in the video. We used to get the electricity straight from the basement by the gym there. Well, then they closed the school, and the school was closed, and the school district was still allowing us to get electricity. However, we had to go in through a window and plug the cords into an outlet that was on the wall because it was too dangerous to go into the building. So we had to draw our electricity and run drop cords around the perimeter of the building, still having concerts on the playground. Then the school district put in an outlet on the north side of the building, facing the playground, so that we would have an outlet on the outside to have these concerts. So we just celebrated our 20th year last year. You can see we've had a lot of help in doing that. First from the school district, and then they changed the park to just be the green space bordered by 10th, Roosevelt, and 9th. So the city built us a nice stage out there, a big wooden platform, 16 by 30, but there was no electricity. Where were we going to get electricity? So we had keys to the Roosevelt in 2006. So we're one of the privileged few, our little Friends of Roosevelt Park. We got to go in the building, and it's gutted like some of the pictures you see there. And we're plugging in 200 feet of drop cord and running it out the east side of the building towards the park to power the stage for the concerts. And that's, the Jensens doing that. We worked closely with Dean at that time, and he was just all about it. He wanted us to continue having our concerts. The city continued to help us. And then I'm not sure who lives on the southeast corner of the main floor. Oh, that's Sharon. We got electricity straight out of Sharon's apartment for 2 years. She would drop her drop cord on her balcony, and we would run our drop cords from there. So, and walking through the deep ruts from the heavy machinery that had been coming in there, and when it rained, those were full of water. So we're running drop cords across these ruts full of water. But the music played on, and it's just a testimony of, I tell the story often, whatever story I'm telling about Roosevelt and the park, it was community effort all the way. The Parks and Recreation people under Keith Abraham, the Jensens, even Sharon in her apartment, and the city of Ames, that whole block is just a testimony to the power of good community. So thanks for listening to that story. I hope you enjoyed it.
Thanks for sharing those memories. And my husband and I were certainly happy to be a small part of keeping the music playing. Again, there are programs for this year's concert over here on the table on this side of the room.
We've got one more over here.
So I remember Mr. Connor saying to us that year that, if you're
Wait, this is Robin. She's an artist from the Brick Animals.
No, I'm not much of an artist, but that was my frog that was up there earlier. I remember Mr. Connor saying, if your animal gets into the, addition of this building, you'll be a part of history. And when you put that up there on the screen, the National Historic Place, and then you said, I'm having my 50th class reunion, I was like, oh my Lord, I am a part of history.
Any more comments or questions?
I think we'll do one more over here, I think.
My children went to Roosevelt School, and one of my memories and their memories would be the Christmas tree in the entryway at Christmas time, and then the egg tree at Easter time. And I'm wondering if there's any thought of restoring those traditions.
Well, we really haven't talked about that, but we do have a section in the second floor hallway of historic photos, and those are certainly included, Judy. They're really fun photos to see. Thank you, everybody. We're happy to have you here, and hopefully you've gained a little bit of new information tonight.
Thank you all for coming. Appreciate it.